Secretary, the other side of the aisle has admonished the Republicans for not having a theory, and let me tell you a little that I've developed from my reading and research and listening today, and it's this: that you initiated a policy to put the United States into Libya as the Secretary of State, and you overcame a number of obstacles within the administration to advocate for military action, and you were successful in doing that. Ultimately, the decision was the president's, as you acknowledge, but you were the prime mover. You were the one that was driving. You were even contemplating something called the Clinton Doctrine, and you were concerned about image. You were concerned about credit, which is not something that is unfamiliar to people in public life. But then I think something happened. And my theory is that after Gaddafi's death and essentially a victory lap, then I think your interest waned, and I think your attention waned. And I think the emails that Mrs. Brooks put forth, you had an answer, and that was, look, I got a lot of information from a lot of different places, but I think you basically gave a victory lap, sort of a mission accomplished quote in October 30th, 2011 in the Washington Post. This is what you said, and this is very declarative. We set into motion a policy that was on the right side of history, on the right side of our values, on the right side of our strategic interests in the region. It has all of the feel of a victory lap, but there was a problem. And the problem, Madam Secretary, was that there were storm clouds that were gathering, and the storm clouds that were gathering was a deteriorating security situation in Benghazi. And you had a lot to lose if Benghazi unraveled. If Libya unraveled, you had a lot to lose. Based on based on the Sunday shows, based on the favorable accolades that were coming, if it went the wrong direction, it would be on you. And if it was stable and it was the right direction, you were the beneficiary of that. So the question is, how is it possible that these urgent requests that came in, how did they not break through to the very upper levels of your inner circle, people who are here today, people who served you? How did those requests from two ambassadors, Ambassador Kretz and Ambassador Stevens, that came in on these dates, June 7th, July 19th, August 2nd, and March 28th, all of 2012, how is it possible that those didn't break through? You've told us that that wasn't your job, basically. You said, I'm not responsible, but here's my theory. I think that this is what was going on. That to admit a need for more security was to admit that there was a deteriorating situation. And to admit a deteriorating situation didn't fit your narrative of a successful foreign policy. Where did I get that wrong?
Congressman. Look, we knew that Libya's transition from the brutal dictatorship of Gaddafi, which basically destroyed or undermined every institution in the country, would be challenging, and we planned accordingly. We worked closely with the Libyan people, with our allies in Europe, with partners in the region, to make sure that we tried to get positioned to help the Libyan people. And yes, the volatile security environment in Libya complicated our efforts, but we absolutely, and I will speak for myself, I absolutely did not forget about Libya after Gaddafi. We worked closely with the interim government, and we offered a wide range of technical assistance. We were very much involved in helping them provide their first parliamentary elections. That was quite an accomplishment. A lot of other countries that were post-conflict did not have anything like the positive elections Libya did. In July of 2012, the transitional government handed over power to a new General National Congress in August. We were doing everything we could think of to help Libya succeed. We tried to bolster the effectiveness of the interim government. We worked very hard to get rid of the chemical weapons, coordinating with the transition Libyan authorities with the UN and others, and by February of 2014, we had assisted in destroying the last of Gaddafi's chemical weapons. We were combating the spread of anti-aircraft shoulder-fired missiles because of the danger that they pose to commercial aircraft. And we were providing assistance, some of which I discussed earlier with Congresswoman Roby. We had humanitarian assistance. We brought people for health to Europe and to the United States. But much of what we offered, despite our best efforts, we had the Prime Minister come to Washington in the spring of 2012. Much of what we offered was difficult for the Libyans to understand how to accept. I traveled, as you know, to Libya and met there. I stayed in close touch with Libya's leaders throughout the rest of my time as secretary. Both of my deputies went there. We talked with the Libyan leadership frequently by phone and communicated regularly, as I have said, with our team based in Tripoli. And all of this was focused on trying to help stand up a new interim government. And we were making progress on demilitarization, demobilization, trying to reintegrate militia fighters into something resembling a security force, and on securing loose weapons. I think it's important to recognize, and of course I was ultimately responsible for security. I took responsibility for what happened in Benghazi.
What does that mean when you say I took responsibility? When Mr. Westmoreland asked you that question, you said, what, contracting and so forth? So when you say you were responsible for something, Madam Secretary, what does that mean? If you're responsible, what action would you have done differently? What do you own as a result of this? So far I've heard, since we've been together today, I've heard one dismissive thing after another. It was this group. It was that group. I wasn't served by this. I wasn't served by that. What did you do? What do you own?
Well, I was just telling you some of the many related issues I was working on to try to help the Libyan people. What's your responsibility to Benghazi? That's my question. Well, my responsibility was to be briefed and to discuss with the security experts and the policy experts whether we would have a post in Benghazi, whether we would continue it, whether we would make it permanent. And as I've said repeatedly throughout the day, no one ever recommended closing the post in Benghazi. No one recommended closing, but you had two ambassadors that made several requests, and here's basically what happened to their requests. They were torn up. Well, that's just not true, Congressman. I know Secretary, they didn't get through. It didn't help them. Were those responded to? Is that your testimony today? Many were responded to. Affirmative responses to a number of requests for additional security. And you laid this on Chris Stevens, didn't you? Because you said earlier he knows where to pull the levers. So aren't you implying that it's his responsibility to figure out how he's supposed to be secure because Chris Stevens knows how to pull the levers? Is that your testimony? Ambassadors are the ones who pass on security recommendations and requests. That's true throughout the world. And when he does, and they too rely on their security professionals. What's his remedy if they're not responded to? What's his remedy if it's no? As I testified earlier, he was in regular email contact with some of my closest advisors. So hit resend, is that it? He was in regular email contact and cable contact with a number of cables didn't get through. You created an environment, Madam Secretary, where the cables couldn't get through. Now, well, that is inaccurate. Cables, as we have testified, and as they didn't get through to you, they didn't break into your inner circle. That was your testimony earlier. You can't have it both ways. You can't say all this information came into me and I was able to process it, and yet it all stops at the security professionals. Well, that's not what Congressman, that's not what I was saying. I think we've tried to clarify that, millions of cables come in. They're processed and sent to the appropriate offices and personnel. With respect to specific... They didn't get through. They didn't make any difference. They couldn't break into the inner circle of decision-making. Now, let me draw your attention in closing to testimony that you gave.
before the House Foreign Affairs Committee in January 2013. And some wonderful things about Ambassador Stevens, similar to what you said in your opening statement today. And they were words that were warm and inspirational and reflecting on his bravery. But I think in light of the facts that come out since your testimony, and I think in light of things that the committee has learned, he's even braver than you acknowledged. In January 2013, this is what you said to Congress. Nobody knew the dangers or the opportunities better than Chris. During the first revolution, then during the transition, a weak Libyan government, marauding militias, even terrorist groups, a bomb exploded in the parking lot of his hotel. He never wavered. He never asked to come home. He never said, let's shut it down, quit, or go somewhere else. Because he understood that it was pivotal for America to be represented in that place at that time. But Secretary Clinton, I think you should have added this. Chris Stevens kept faith with the State Department that I headed, even when we broke faith with him. He accepted my invitation to serve in Benghazi, even though he was denied the security he implored us to give him. I and my colleagues were distracted by other matters and opportunities and ambitions, and we breached our fundamental duty to mitigate his danger and secure his safety, and that of Glenn Doherty, Sean Smith, and Tyrone Woods. That'd be more accurate, wouldn't you say, Secretary Clinton?
Of course I would not say that, and I think that it's a disservice for you to make that statement, Congressman. And it's
Who does it disserve?
Well, it is a disservice of how hard the people who are given the responsibility of making these tough security decisions.
The people that were disciplined,
to do so.
Did they keep faith with Chris Stevens? No.
Well, Chris Stevens was someone who had a commitment to our presence in Libya.
There's no question.
And we want to honor that by continuing to do what we can to support the Libyan people's transition. It is very much, in my view, in America's interest to continue to try to do so.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired.